best, okay? I'll do my best. Today, we're in 2 Samuel 17. Today's sermon is entitled Ahithophel, the Consequences of an Unforgiving Spirit. Civil war has broken out in Israel. Absalom, David's third son by Maacah, daughter of Talmai, who is the king of Geshur, has slain his older brother, Amnon. Why would he kill his brother? Because he had raped Tamar, the half-sister of Absalom. No doubt Absalom blamed David for running his family so poorly, and of a truth he did, that the rape could have occurred. Absalom may even have blamed David's adultery with Bathsheba as a motivator that encouraged Amnon to do what he did. And now Absalom is faced with trial for murder. So he flees from his father-in-law to his father-in-law, King Talmai, and David does mourn his absence. And after years of self-exile, Absalom is allowed to return to Jerusalem, but only after Joab, who was a mighty man of war and the commander of David's army, persuaded David to let the young man come home. But the relationship between the father and son is icy cold. So much so that Absalom is banned from the king's presence. And at this time, he has been living 2 years in Jerusalem and hasn't seen his father one time. Absalom wants to see the king for his own interests, and he asks Joab to intercede once again. And Joab says, no way, man. I think Joab didn't want to get between two power figures. So you know what Absalom did? Let me tell you how he made Joab do it. He sent some of his men to Joab's largest field. I imagine it was probably wheat. And they put the torch to it and burned it down. Now you get a little measure of the heart of Absalom from that, don't you? And Joab goes to David. And he suggests that David let Absalom come and see him. And he does. And Absalom pleads his case. He's welcomed back. And David kisses him. Sounds like everything's hunky-dory, doesn't it? Talking about an unforgiving spirit. Absalom has an unforgiving spirit. It's not good. It just looks like it is. 15:1-4 says this, in the course of time, Absalom provided himself with a chariot and horses and 50 men to run ahead of him. Man, that looks impressive, doesn't it? It was supposed to look impressive. Absalom has ulterior motives. He'd get up early and stand by the side of the road leading to the city gate. Whenever anyone came with a complaint to be placed before the king for a decision, Absalom would call out to him, what town are you from? And make note of it for later usage. And the man would answer something like, well, I'm a servant of such and so tribe of Israel. You can make a note of that too. Then Absalom would say to the man, look, your claims are valid and proper, but there's no representative of the king to hear them. And then he would add, oh, if only I were appointed judge in the land. Then everyone who has a complaint or a case could come to me, and I'd see they receive justice. That proves to you that Absalom's still bitter against his father, doesn't it? So he begins this campaign to win the hearts of the people away from King David. He tells David that while he had been down in Geshur, he'd made a vow that when he came back to Jerusalem, he'd worship the Lord in Hebron. And so, under the guise of worship, he asked King David to allow him to leave Jerusalem. He couldn't leave Jerusalem because he was under watch. David didn't trust him. And go down 30 miles to Hebron. But when he gets down there, guess what he does? He sets up a headquarters. And he begins to send secret messages. You know, all those people that he called out to and took their names and tribes? He starts sending them secret messages to come and help form an oppositional army. He's going to dethrone David. So in order to revolt successfully, he goes one more step. He sends for David's lead counselor, Ahithophel, and asks him to come. Now, this will do two things at once. Absalom's not dumb. He's plotting pretty smartly here. Ahithophel will give him the counsel he used to give to David. And scriptures record that the counsel of Ahithophel was as if he were an oracle of God. Meaning, as if he had his ear to God's mouth and then speaking what God said. That's how much he was revered. That will add stature to Absalom. But it will also draw more Israelites to him. Pretty crafty. And so, with this, he's ready to seize power. In 15, 13, and 31, David learns two things. He is told that the people's loyalty has shifted from him to Absalom. And he also learns that his most trusted advisor has gone over to Absalom and deserted him. David is distraught. He does what a godly man does. What would that be? He drops to his knees and prays. And he says, Lord, turn Ahithophel's counsel into foolishness. (15, 32, 34). When David arrived at the summit where people used to worship God, Hushai, the Archite, was there to meet him. His robe torn and dust on his head. That tells you he's in mourning. He's in mourning over what's happening to David. And David said to him, if you go with me, you will be a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, Your Majesty, I will be your servant. I was your father's servant in the past, but now I will be your servant. Then you can help me by frustrating Absalom's advice. David sends Hushai to be a spy and to be a thwarter. Now, I'm sure David, at this point in time, understood that Ahithophel's betrayal was part of God's judgment for his lustful sin with Bathsheba, and then for developing a plan whereby her husband, Uriah, would be killed in battle, so that the child she was pregnant with, everybody would think was Uriah's. David committed two horrible sins. And he probably understood that Bathsheba and Joab had both probably told Ahithophel. And for Ahithophel, it became a root of bitterness. You know why? From Scripture we learn that Bathsheba's father was Eliam. And Eliam's father, you want to guess it? Was Ahithophel. David had taken sexual advantage of Ahithophel's granddaughter and had her husband killed. And there is a root of bitterness inside him. It is an unpardonable sin. It's rejection of God's offer of pardon and forgiveness. You say, well, prove that. Okay, I'll prove it. Matthew 6:15 says this, "For if you forgive men when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive men their sins, your Father will not forgive your sin." It's unpardonable. Now, a few words about what forgiveness is not. Forgiveness is not that we have the offender come crawling to us on their knees, hopefully on broken glass, begging for forgiveness. That's not forgiveness. That's retribution. Forgiveness is not requiring others to stand up and say, "I was wrong, and you were right." That's humiliation. On the other hand, granting true forgiveness, whether the other party asks for it or not, turns out to be very liberating. I had a very long story. Let's see if I can cut it short, because now I'd like to use it. I wish I hadn't cut it. And by the way, tonight's sermon, I've already cut over half of it out. There was a church in Michigan that started with independent Presbyterians, and they hired a Reformed Baptist who encouraged them to change the name of the church from Linden Community Church to Linden Community Baptist Church. And then all the Baptists who started moving into the community, guess what? Where'd they go? There. And soon their numbers were greater than the independent Presbyterians' numbers. There would be election for offices and other things. And the people who were Baptists were getting elected. And other issues were going their way. So the people who formed that church got bitter, rose up, went door to door, campaigning, bad-mouthing. And one business meeting night, I'll never forget, I'm sure Phyllis will never forget it, they showed up with a whole bunch of people we'd never seen before that turned out to be on the church rolls, and at that time we didn't purge our rolls if you hadn't been there in a certain amount of time. We changed that. And they began to complain about everything that was to come before the church. And finally the pastor said, "What is it that you want?" And they gave a 5-word reply. Listen to those words. "We want our church back." We means we're not. You want our church, not your church. By the way, it's neither one of them. It's the Lord's church. Back, meaning you stole it. The most unusual split I ever saw in my life. Without prior planning, without prior knowledge, didn't even foresee this. 3/4 of the church stood up and walked out. Guess you have your church back. And over the next couple of weeks, because the pastor was speaking for 2 more weeks, they continued to come, but they began to talk with each other on the phone, decided to form a church, and did. And on the very first 2 minutes of the first meeting, they agreed to forgive the people of the other church and put it behind them. That church grew to over 600. That pastor, my dear friend, died about 6 weeks ago. That church is over 600. Over 600 in number. And the other church? Less than 30. And I commit to you that if Faith Baptist Church had not forgiven those other people, they wouldn't have been successful either. A bitter spirit almost never affects the person against whom the bitter spirit is aimed. It almost never affects that person. But guess who it does affect? The person who holds the bitter spirit. It eats them up. Granting forgiveness is liberating. Holding on to a bitter spirit is just debilitating. So, Hushai does what David asks of him. He follows David's directive. He overcomes Absalom's doubts about him. He convinces Absalom that he wants to follow Absalom because, as he says it, the Lord is obviously behind you and so are the people. Now, Hushai is lying. We can get into the discussion of, is it ever right to lie? I might surprise you with that answer. Well, Rahab hid the spies. When the Canaanites come to get them, she says, they're not here. And what does the Bible say about her? That she gave the spies a friendly welcome. Midwives saved Moses' life and reported to Pharaoh that they had killed all the babies. But they hadn't. And at the end of Genesis it says the midwives feared God and they were honored. God told Samuel not to disclose his mission of going down to find David and to lie to Saul. Sometimes deception is proper. Ever play football? I played a quarterback for a while. I shouldn't have played that position. It's not my position. I'm more of a defensive lineman or a middle linebacker. That's what I love playing the most. But quarterbacks would come and they would think as if they were going to throw and then pitch and there'd be a run. Is that wrong? That's not wrong, is it? I used to be a boxer. I'd throw that left, not intended to land, just to get them to move their head so I could come across with my right. It's called thinking, right? It's okay, isn't it, to do that? It's deception. But it's not meant for evil. The second piece of advice that Ahithophel gives to David is this. We're in 16:19 through 22. Absalom said to Ahithophel, "Give us your advice. What should we do about David?" Ahithophel answered, "Sleep with your father's concubines, whom he left to take care of the palace. Then all Israel will hear that you have made yourself obnoxious to your father, and the hands of everyone with you will be more resolute." So they pitched a tent on the roof of the palace. And he slept with his father's concubines in the sight of all of Israel. Well, did it make David look smaller? Yeah. Did it make Absalom look bigger? Yeah. Ahithophel's on, isn't it? But it was sinful. It was wrong. And imagine how much Ahithophel demonstrates his grudge against David in this advice. He had to get a lot of perverse satisfaction, don't you think? David had abused his granddaughter. Now David's concubines will be abused. The difference is David did it in secret. This will be done in public. On top of the roof, for crying out loud, of the palace. (16:23), the next verse. Now, in those days, the advice that Ahithophel gave was like that of one who inquires of God. That was how both David and Absalom regarded all of Ahithophel's advice. And that's true. His advice was dead on every time. His wisdom and human counsel were to be obeyed without question, just as if it was a command from God. And what a vile command to abuse David's harem. But God. Two most powerful words in the entire Bible. But God. Man may be doing that kind of wicked foolishness, but God enters into the mix. And we learn from 2 Samuel 12, 11 through 12, this is what the Lord says. Out of your own household, David, I'm going to bring calamity upon you. Before your very eyes, I will take your wives and give them to one who is close to you, your son. And he will be with your wives in broad daylight. You did it in secret, but I will do this thing in broad daylight before all Israel. It fulfilled God's statement. Just so you know, God's still in control here. Absalom's not in control. Ahithophel's not in control. Just looks like it. God is. Watch how this unfolds. So the second bit of a counsel. What do we do with David? Ahithophel said to Absalom, I would choose 12,000 men and set out tonight in pursuit of David. I would attack him while he's weary and weak. I would strike him with terror, and then all the people with him will flee. I would strike down only the king. Uh-oh. Did you catch the mistake? I thought he was talking to the king, Absalom. He just admitted David's king. I would strike down only the king and bring all the people back to you. The death of the man you seek will mean the return of all, and the people will be unharmed. This plan seemed good to Absalom and to all the elders of Israel. Again, Ahithophel's counsel is spot on. 12,000 super soldiers moving at lightning speed, overtaking a weary David before he can regroup, before he can add men to his army, slaughtering. It's what General Houston did to Santa Anna. It's what George Schwarzkopf did in the Gulf War. It's what General Patton did in Europe. Strike fast, strike hard. Don't give them a bit of relief. It would have worked. That strategy almost always works. Problem is God's going to interfere. He does that. Having heard that advice, Absalom turns to Hushai. Okay? What's your advice? He says, you know what? Ahithophel's advice is premature. It's just not a winning strategy at this time. Maybe later, but not now. David's army is made up of mighty men experienced in war, and they are absolutely enraged at having been driven out of Jerusalem. You're not going to find him easily. He'll probably hear you coming. Your element of surprise is lost. And if you follow him too quickly, he just might set up a trap and ambush you. Here's my advice. It's sort of the wait and gain numbers strategy. Sort of like what McClellan did in West Virginia during the Civil War. Lincoln kept trying to get that man to attack, and he never did. He finally outnumbered the Rebs 3-1. You know what he did? He didn't attack. He wrote Lincoln for more troops. Lincoln finally fired him. So let's just wait and gain numbers. Besides, just think how you would look riding on a big prancing steed at the run of tens and tens of thousands of people. He appealed to Absalom's pride, and Absalom was very proud. Can Can't you just see yourself in full battle array, leading an invincible army? Absalom and the men of Israel said, the advice of Hushai the Archite is better than that of Ahithophel. Now, how in the world could Hushai prevail over a man who spoke as if he was an oracle of God? How could that be? Well, the last part of verse 14 of chapter 17 is like Paul Harvey would say, the rest of the story. And here we find God's sovereignty being demonstrated. 17:14b, hear these words closely. For the Lord had purposed to frustrate the good advice of Ahithophel in order to bring disaster on Absalom. God inserts himself into the affairs of men, and he sets about to get the end he desires. For the Lord had purposed to defeat the good advice of Ahithophel to the intent that the Lord might bring disaster on Hushai. Hushai knows that David needs time. He needs time to regroup. He needs time to avoid capture. He needs time to avoid defeat. He needs to be safe for a while, just in case Absalom were to change his mind and decide to follow Ahithophel's advice. He needs to be safe. So Hushai advises David to flee across the Jordan River to a safer place. And there David finds a benefactor by the name of Bahurim, who's a loyalist to him. But what is really important there is the slave woman of Bahurim's has David and his men go down in the well, and then she covers it over. And when Jonathan's scouts come and said, have you seen David and his men? No. Nobody's gone this way. Deception again. So David escapes to be victorious later. Now, being wise as he was, Ahithophel saw and projected the defeat of Absalom. Hushai's advice isn't going to work. Ahithophel knows that. It wasn't designed to work, it was designed to fail. And being wise and knowing that Absalom was doomed, then so would be he, for he was a traitor to David, and that death would be a brutal one. So, Ahithophel stands for Judas Iscariot, by the way. He's a type of Judas Iscariot. He's a betrayer. And just like Judas, he went home, put his affairs in order, and hanged himself. Everything was against David, but God turned it completely around. Let me finish a little early in this message. Is that all right? I have 2 points I want to make to you. First, without question, the sin of the unforgiving spirit rarely ever hurts the person that you have the unforgiving spirit against. It's rare that it ever happens. But it will destroy the person holding the grudge. If people have wronged you, don't be bitter about it. Forgive them. Forgive them. And go about your way. Can you feel the release already in doing that? What a release. Second, throughout the Bible, you can name numbers of examples where God inserts himself into humanity and brings change. Last week we talked about Hagar, didn't we? Dying of thirst, watching her son 1,000 feet away, dying of thirst. And God intervened into the lives of men. And reminds her, I'm going to make a mighty nation of that boy Ishmael. Oh, by the way, Hagar, open your eyes. And what did she see? A well right there that God had arranged to be there some time ago, knowing she would need it right here. That's God in charge of things. And he is in charge of things. The last book of Revelations has an interesting verse. It's Revelation 17:17. For God has put it into their hearts. Did you get that? For God has put it into their hearts to fulfill his purpose, so that they'll be of one mind and give their kingdom to the beast. God does get involved in human situations. And when he does, everything gets turned around. The opposite of where it was going. Tonight, I want to speak on the plight of the shepherd who faced the big bad bully. It's an important topic. It deals with bullying. And bullying occurs absolutely everywhere. Some families have bullies. Might be the father who's the big bad bully. Sometimes it's the wife. And increasingly in America today, it's the teenager who decides to bully their parents around. As you can probably imagine, that did not happen in my house. I used the Bill Cosby approach. Boy, I brought you into this world, I can take you out. You know? Don't allow that. Bullying occurs on the job. Bullying occurs with neighbors. Bullying occurs in the church. Sad to say. There are some who decide they're going to bully somebody else around and tell them what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. And what you do is you withstand the bully and stand your ground. And that's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm going to do. Wednesday night we're going to study the breastplate of righteousness and the boots of peace so that we are prepared to do spiritual warfare. The message today was two-pronged. You're taught in homiletics only to have one key thought, and I've had two. Don't hold on to an unforgiving spirit. It'll just kill you. Don't do it. And the other one is always know God is in control. He's sovereign. And David did the right thing when he said, Lord, defeat the counsel of Ahithophel. Bring it to nothing. And God did. And those are the two messages I would have you take away from this sermon today.